Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Kaylee. I'm a bookseller at Women and Children First. We're just one of a few feminist bookstores left, and we are so thankful you're spending an evening with us to celebrate the release of Kat Chow's womanist memoir, Seeing Ghosts. Tonight she will be in conversation with Lillian Li. We begin our virtual events as we begin our events in the store with a land acknowledgement. Please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. A few logistics. In just a few moments, I'll introduce Kat and Lillian for reading, then conversation and questions. If you'd like to ask a question, there's an ask a question button at the bottom of the screen. Please place your questions in there as opposed to the chat, so they're always easy to find. There's also the handy buy the book button, which is in blue, that will link you to the Women and Children First website. We have curbside pickup, in-store pickup, or we ship nationally as well. The event will run about an hour. Feel free to use the chat to say something nice and all other great virtual event etiquette. And now for our introductions. Lillian Li is the author of the novel #1 Chinese Restaurant, which was an NPR Best Book of 2018 and a finalist for the Women's Prize. Her work has been published in the New York Times, One Story, and Travel and Leisure. Originally from the DC metro area, she lives in Ann Arbor. Kat Chow is a writer and a journalist. She was a reporter at NPR, where she was a founding member of the Code Switch team. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, The Atlantic, and on Radiolab, among many others. She's also one of Pop Culture Happy Hour's 4th chairs. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Welcome, Lillian and Kat.
Thank you for that intro. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be talking with Kat about her amazing memoir, Seeing Ghosts. We were just talking in the green room about how I saw maybe an earlier draft of this, and I'm probably going to end up bringing those VIP privileges into our conversation today. But before we get started, love to hear you just read a little bit from your memoir so we can kind of hear it in your voice.
Absolutely. And I will be reading tonight from one of the beginning sections of this book. And just as a little bit of overview, this book is a lot about taxidermy, or it uses taxidermy as one of its main narrative devices, which is something that I was just so interested in trying to do as a writer, because it was a little bit strange, it was macabre, and it was just so tied to my family. And so the portion that I'm going to read from is from a memory from when I was about 9 years old. And I was sitting in the family room with my mother. And she has a great sense of humor, is what I'll say. You sat up slowly and fixed your gaze on me. You spread your lips wide into a grin and jutted out your top front teeth like you were a curly-haired, round-faced Dracula. This was our family's special face, the one you slipped on suddenly and presented to me, Steph, and Caroline. You dug your top teeth into your bottom lip and widened your eyes huge until we mirrored your expression, all of us laughing until we approached tears. Sometimes you gave a long blink, which was your way of winking, since you had trouble closing only one eye. You made the face at random, standing by the boxes of Frosted Flakes in the cereal aisle, or when you walked into the house after a long day at work, or when we were in the driver's seat of your van and ferrying us to an appointment. When I die, you said as you made the face, I want you to get me stuffed so I can sit in your apartment and always watch you. This was the first and would be the only time that you would address your death with me. You raised your eyebrows. I was 9 and nowhere near having my own apartment. I still shared my bed with you. Each night, I fell asleep with my head nestled into your armpit, with a leg thrown over your waist while you flew through one of the romance novels you borrowed from the library in bagfuls and called kissing books, making smooching noises gleefully whenever you said those words. I always assumed you slept in my room because you loved me so much. I never considered any other reasons. Now, you bared your teeth like you were wild, like the stuffed grizzly bear we saw at the L.L. Bean store when we took a vacation to Maine earlier that year. I wailed immediately upon seeing the bear's face molded into a grimace, and I continued to howl each time we stumbled upon a fawn or moose or goat scattered throughout the store. The sight of their faces, locked in the same position for eternity, shot a prickly sensation into my feet. It's okay, you had said. You stepped closer to the bear, its body hulking over us, its paws the size of dinner plates. Okay, you asked. You reached across the couch to hold my hand. Would you like that? Would I like for you to be stuffed? You studied me expectantly as though you wanted me to make the face. I snatched my hand back and let out a yip. As a kid, I pictured future dead you sitting with future alive me in my apartment. I could not tell if I was peering into a dream or nightmare. It was a small rental, though inside it looked exactly like our family's kitchen. My entire apartment was just our kitchen. There was the red Formica counter that you and Daddy picked because you insisted a bright vermilion like that meant good fortune. Piles of newspapers coated nearly every surface. A bundle of jade plants sat in a corner, their rounded leaves hanging limp on the ceramic tile floor, which had been stained a tired spotted beige. Thank you.
Thank you. I love hearing you read it in your voice because you're just a really funny person. Like, I can just vouch for your sense of humor. And I feel like it really comes through when you're reading just how much this kind of deadpan, sarcastic, wicked, mischievous humor comes through when you're talking about things that might otherwise be seen as more, I don't know, poetic or lyrical or, something that shouldn't be taken light of, death or being stuffed. And I feel like that even, translates to the copy of your book, like the summary of it on the inside flap. And I don't know, did you get approval of what they wrote on your inside flap, Kat?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
So I think actually the inside flap, I can't remember correctly, but there are many iterations of it. And I think I helped write one of the earlier ones, and my editor. And I think the marketing team or my editor kind of built on it in a really lovely way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm realizing that the exact phrasing is not actually in this inside flap. I think it shows up in summaries when I've gone on websites, but it basically has this one phrase that stood out to me that says, Kat Chow has always been unusually fixated on death. And there's just something about that phrasing. And when I think about that passage that you just read, it makes me think about death as a subject that a lot of people try not to think about. And so I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about what you think about when you think about death and how maybe that has changed as, it seems like it started even when you were 9 years old to now. How has that maybe changed in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. I mean, I think when I was a small child and I was afraid of things that were no longer living, I was always reacting to the very visceral feeling that happens when you come across something so uncanny. I think I was always confused what happened when someone or something died, and it was sort of the existential question that really always frightened me the most. Like, what happened to a soul? Was it still there? Was it just hanging out in, the stuffed bear at the L.L. Bean store? And I think I was always fascinated, and I would react just so physically to this. And as an adult, I still have those tendencies to want to turn away. And to want to not face whatever is frightening in front of me. And so I think that as a writer, I was really intrigued by that and wanted to force myself with this book to have to turn and address the things that had, frightened me or made me uncomfortable previously.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that you can see throughout this memoir that there is this working through of things that you had turned away in the past. And there's, an especially great and compelling scene where you find a fish that your father tried to taxidermy in the basement. And even being in the same house as that fish really just like gave you the creeps kind of by osmosis. And I wondered what was maybe the experience of turning into the things that you originally wanted to turn away from? What was it like to face the very, topics or moments that you tried to avoid in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think one collection of poetry, especially that helped me think about this, was Diana Coy Wynn's poetry collection, Ghost of, where it's so much about her brother who passed, and he actually took his own life. And one of the things that he did when he was still alive was he took the family photos down from the walls and cut himself from them. And in her collection, she's sort of wrapped her poems around them, or played with the negative spaces, or sort of, placed her poems and her words where his body would be. And I was so fascinated by that. And in interviews, she's kind of spoken about how for many years it was so hard for her to even look at photos of her family. And that was something that really resonated with me. Just the idea of forcing yourself to sit with these memories that come about, or these deep, deep emotions. And I knew that when I wrote Seeing Ghosts, there's the taxidermy, which is sort of like this physical embodiment of ghosts, or, death as it manifests. But I also knew that I wanted memory and the absence of someone to serve in that same way. And so that's why I thought her poetry collection, which I reference a few times, was so impactful. And I loved how she sort of, spoke about writing into his absence and wanting to fill it with her own work.
Yeah, and I think that I really loved you bringing in that poetry collection as, a way to think about how you are also trying to write about the death of your mother, because there is a sense of circling a negative space, trying to fill in negative space. And I mentioned seeing earlier draft of this book, and the feeling that I had reading Seeing Ghosts now in this iteration was this kind of sense of, deja vu, because I think almost all the scenes that I had read previously do show up again in this book, but it's the order in which they come in, the way that you've structured all of these events that made it feel also completely different, like a totally reincarnation of what I'd read in the past. And there is maybe a sense of a circling that is happening in the way that you choose to create, or rather choose to order these scenes. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about why you chose to introduce information when you did, or events when you did.
Yeah, structure was always so hard, because I think I knew that I wanted this book to, in a way, have some sort of linear timeline, but also I knew that memories, and especially the way grief and loss works, and the way many people, or at least I experience it, is it comes in flashes, and you never know when a scent or a taste is going to bring someone back into your life, or bring an idea or a thought, and sort of re-expose you to something that was really joyous, or something that was really painful, or very funny, or very strange, that you're still trying to make sense of. And actually, I was having a conversation with someone the other day about how, for her, sometimes memories are really painful to experience again, or even dare yourself to try and think of, because for her, at least, it was, memories are the last time you've ever really thought of something. So if I'm thinking about my mother, and the way she used to play hide and seek with us during thunderstorms, which I was thinking about all this week with the storms on the East Coast, really the memory that I'm thinking of, just running through the house in the dark, it's truly layered over and covered by perhaps the time I thought of it previously. And so it's not the truest moment. And so I knew that I wanted to play with these different timelines, but also to give myself a lot of flexibility to allow the reader to feel loss the way that I do. And I knew that I wanted the narrator to sort of be situated closer to the present, and to have there were just a series of events that I knew the narrator wanted to sort of question and drive the story forward to. And I don't want to give too much away, but one of them is related to my father, who also was searching and kind of had a parallel story of loss that is also being traced throughout the book. And so there's just a lot of different things I was working with. So trying to tell the story of my father's journey of loss, my mother's, while also showing my attempt to understand both of them and the questions that drive it. So it kind of was a mix of trying to figure out ways to address and answer those questions.
Yeah, there's like what feels to be a very organic structure, and that makes a lot of sense that you are trying to impart the impression of how grief feels to you, while also trying to tie together these multiple parallel paths through history that your mother went through, that you went through, and that your dad went through, and that you go through in trying to understand these two separate paths as well. So there's like a lot of interesting crisscrossing. And really, if I tried to map it, I think it would be like a really beautiful abstract painting. Like I can't even imagine how this structure would look. And it makes sense that it maybe wasn't as much, you know, a strict plotting out of here is how I'm going to tell the story, more kind of feeling the intuition and the instincts of where you want it to go. And I wanted to touch on something that you brought up in terms of, you know, the ways that grief can sometimes be in glimpses that you see of the person that you've lost, and tying that back to the passage that you read where you talk about the smile that is your mom's special smile with the vampire teeth. And something that I loved was how that was a recurring image throughout the book. You basically gave us the experience of seeing it flashed in glimpses of this smile, showing up in sometimes the most unexpected of places. And I wondered if you always knew that you were going to be bringing the smile in throughout the book, or if you played around with other ways to kind of evoke the sense of glimpsing someone in a place that you hadn't expected.
Yeah, I think it started really because I wanted this book to be so much about the body too. I really tried to pay close attention to the way I wrote the body, the way I wrote sort of what it means at times to feel out of body or perhaps a little disassociated or disconnected from yourself. But also I wanted to write about the ways our bodies can break down, or we can be afraid of them, or we can lack control over them. And as a way to sort of help with the mood, and I guess also to allow myself to write about my mom's body in a more playful, pleasant way, that was why it was so important for me to invoke her tooth face, which is really goofy. And it really was an organic device. I think that I wanted to use that face also as a way to just show my sisters and me and our connection, because that's a physical way that, you know, my mother lives on through us. It's just the way we make it to each other, the way we make it to other people, and even the way my uncle had once made it to me. And so, yeah, it became another one of those smaller things that just had so many references. And I think one of the things that I loved about writing Seeing Ghosts is that while it does, I mean, you kind of mentioned that it's sort of, if you tried to structure it or map out its structure, it would, do you look like an abstract painting? For me, I think that it's driven by a set of questions of what do we owe? What do we owe ourselves? What do we owe our families? What do we owe our senses of self, our culture, our country? What debts do we owe also? But I think that also helped me address sort of the flow of everything. But what I loved writing about this book is there are just so many different nods to tiny references, and it felt as though I was winking at the reader when I was writing, where the teeth face would come up, or I would mention Diana Coy Wynn or Anne Lin Chang, who is one of the Asian American scholars who wrote about racial melancholia. And I would, she wrote about that concept, and she had a beautiful line that was something like, the person who has lost someone eats or feeds on that loss and needs it so much. And I would just insert that language throughout the book and have eats and feeds and gorging on grief or something be sort of a tie into that. And so in a way, all of that was quite intentional. And it was like putting together a puzzle piece, and it was really fun and challenging to try and make that work.
Yeah, and I think that I really like the idea of them being kind of like winks to the reader, a way of pulling them in, almost like a kind of shorthand that a family might ultimately come up with over a long period of inside jokes. You're creating, a kind of a version of that for the reader as they travel through your family with you. And I was also very interested in, you brought up your sisters, and I just love their portrayals in this book. And really, I love the Chow girls, the three sisters, right? There's this modern day fairy tale aspect to the three of you, not just because there's three. And there's this really great story that your dad tells, which maybe you don't like as much based off of how you described it in the book, where he's trying to teach or force you guys to do the multiplication tables. And they have one daughter who's dutiful, the next daughter who rebels but ultimately gives in, and then we have the third daughter who cries and cries until she gets her way. And so it's just
and that third daughter is me.
It's just such a classic fairy tale structure. But you were also talking about how, you wanted to invoke the connection that your sisters have. And what I hear from that is also how you three belong in a family, that anyone reading this would be able to, in the same way that they would by looking at you, see the family resemblance. And I just loved seeing the ways in which you and your sisters kind of reflect and complement and contradict each other, and ultimately as a whole seem like you come from the same set of parents. I just wondered what it was like for you to write about you and your sisters as characters in this memoir.
Yeah, it was interesting because I remember when I first started trying to write about them, my main goal was to show the ways that they mothered me. And I realized quickly on that I needed to differentiate them as characters, because for me, I know their personalities so well. And it was such an exercise and a challenge in showing and trying to distill the entirety of our relationships into these tiny arcs to show to the reader those how different from one another they are and how unique they are. But I also realized that they were also, as characters, ways to show a different side of each of my parents and my mother, and the ways in which she was so hard on them, like the anecdotes of her getting frustrated with them in the middle of the night when they were getting ready for bed and trying to make them go sit outside in the middle of the night while they were brushing their teeth is one story. And just the ways in which that was slightly different for me. But also the jokes and the playful sort of interactions that we had with each other, where you can kind of trace our personalities from our mother and our father too. And how those dynamics evolve and grow as we get older. Yeah, I think that it was really lovely getting to write them into sort of this archive of family history, because they were just so pivotal to my understanding of grief. And they also just show a different type of, people from our generation also undergoing the same specific loss, but it manifesting in such a different way. And I think I that was really important for me, just to make it clear that this book wasn't just, it was my family's story, and it was told from my specific lens, and it was just one version, but it also attempted to show their perspectives throughout it all.
Absolutely. I think that this book definitely felt like a collective memory or a collective project where maybe you were the one building, but they were contributing the bricks, not just your nuclear family, but your extended family as well. Is that kind of how it felt as you were writing it?
Yeah, well, I interviewed them quite a bit for it, and I don't think I could have written this book had they not been so supportive of it, because I just simply wouldn't have known a lot of things. And it was really interesting because I think as a journalist, I'm used to interviewing people. I'm used to, being able to get information or build a story off of what they say. But usually I don't have to live with that story and experience it all the time. And usually it's different when I'm fact checking it. So, for example, writing the story of my brother's death when he was my brother was born before me and he died shortly after birth. And that was a really challenging thing because I was not alive for that. And I had to interview my sisters and my father and my aunts and uncles about it. And yet people could not simply agree on specific things like when his body had been cremated. And so trying to get to the bottom of that was really interesting and hard and almost, I knew the factual answers, but I found including the uncertainty to be a really important thing because I wanted to show the ways in which our memories react to this trauma and our memories sort of will try and protect ourselves from specific things that happen in our life. And yeah, I wanted to demonstrate that as a writer who's trying to make sense of the truest form of memory, whatever that is.
Absolutely. It feels like how you remember something often tells you more about yourself than the actual event you're trying to remember.
Yeah.
And it gets even more meta when you're, someone trying to write about remembering and what that does. It just really is a wonderful way of thinking about how things get misunderstood or understood maybe in a truer sense along the way as we kind of reinterpret it with our unconscious. And I feel like I was really interested in how just the experience probably behind the scenes of interviewing family members who've known you since you were a baby, because you're the baby of the family, is that right?
I'm the baby of the family. Everyone still treats me like the baby. I probably still act like the baby.
Exactly. And I feel like that could be a potential disadvantage when you're trying to interview people.
There were just certain things like my Cantonese is so bad that it became really hard interviewing one of my aunts because it had to be filtered through her son, my cousin. And, it just, when you're trying to interview someone about something so emotional, so much can be lost in translation, but also, again, so much of this book is about the body and fears of the body and specifically the women in my family and the very specific issues around fertility or health or things of that nature that I could just tell my aunt not wanting to share with her son. So there were situations like that. And one of my background as a reporter has just taught me to keep asking questions, even if they seem so basic, and ask them in many different ways and just wait. Wait for the answer and just sit. And people will keep talking to fill the silence. And I think pretty quickly my family understood I was quite serious about this. And working on a project for years will do that, where we'll realize they can't really keep dodging your questions. But also, honestly, I think my aunts and uncles, well, my aunt especially, and my sisters and my dad, I felt this sense of relief in them wanting to tell this story too. And I think they understood really early on that this was important to talk about the family and to talk about what happened.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially if there hasn't been an outlet for that before, that there becomes an extra weight perhaps in feeling like you can't say something.
Yeah.
That it makes a lot of sense that you giving them the opportunity and really forcing them to do it. by asking over and over again, so that, you know, in some ways we're also thinking maybe like we're helping in you in order to say this, which is often how I get my parents to tell me anything, is to say, oh, I need this for an assignment. This would really help with my career if you told me how to make this recipe that you'll never give me the ingredients for.
Yeah, or like if you told me about, I don't know, what you know about your father or something like that. I don't know.
But I did feel like your background in journalism was a really strong and unique part of this memoir and how it was put together, in part because there's just this investigative quality to it. You take what feels like paper trail straw and you spin it into story gold. I feel like you must have just been looking at receipts and bills and trying to reverse engineer a story out of what to other people would just look like scraps of paper. How are you able to maybe think about or put together a narrative from basically just a folder of paper?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because I think early on, I mean, when you're writing about someone who's no longer there, you're writing into the absence of someone, which can be quite challenging, especially when, I mean, as forthcoming as my family was, speaking of my mom was still incredibly hard for them in a lot of different ways, where I knew that, you know, my aunt was not going to be able to tell me about what my mom had aspired to for a career, or, you know, the things that she found very funny. And a lot of the ways that I tried to do that was simply just by looking at photos and trying to imagine a sort of imagine the texture and imagine the context of that photo. Or one anecdote, you mentioned receipts. My father, if you've read the book, you know, my father keeps everything. And that actually was to my benefit. All of these little monuments to our family. And as a writer and as a journalist, and I guess now as a memoirist, that was so useful and special, because I could sift through decades of my mom's receipts, and she would keep meticulous, accounting of her finances. And I could see when credit card companies were canceling their accounts, or I could see when she finally paid off a baby grand piano that she had always wanted. And seeing the exact dates of when she made those payments would confirm in my head, the years that she decided to buy it. And I could sort of line that up with different anecdotes that my family had provided about her asking her father for financial help or something like that. Or then I would take those receipts and think about the piano, and then go and ask my relatives about, do you remember when she purchased this piano? Or my sisters too. And everyone would have something to add to it. And so it was a lot of going back and forth and like taking this found item and imagining either imagining the context around it and then asking about it for confirmation, or simply just writing it as it was. In the book, there's also just a chapter that is basically a record of my mother's phone conversations with her siblings and the amount of time that they spoke. And seeing those phone bills it was so powerful, because it made me realize how often they spoke, which was every night. And it helped me understand how acutely they must have experienced her death, because when that phone stops ringing, there's nothing harder than that. You know, it's this constant reminder of what's not there.
I think definitely that moment had such an emotional punch to it. And it's also, there is, something that you're doing maybe intuitively where you see those records and you can feel the emotions behind them. And I think the ability to translate that kind of, found material into the emotional moment or emotional shadow it casts, I think is a really magical thing that happens in this book. And another thing that you'll do is you'll actually work really creatively with the constraints of the facts that you're given. So there is this imagination that happens, but there's also this, one of my favorite moments is when you talk about how your parents met at a tag sale in Manchester, Connecticut, is it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I wrote down the
Good
sentence because I think it's such a good sentence. So they meet and you say, meeting another immigrant who spoke the same Chinese dialect was rare for a suburb like Manchester, where the demographics in the 1980s skewed mostly white. And I just love in that sentence how in the boldest of terms, you are saying something magical happened. The fact that these two people met speaking the same dialect, the sheer statistical improbability of that, it must have felt like magic to them. And you don't really ever come out and say that because you're working within the constraints of the facts that you know are true, in part because you're not quite able to get the emotional details of that moment out.
Right.
And I'm wondering, because I feel like maybe in the earlier draft that I saw, there was more of an imagining, an attempt to recreate the moment, and you pare it down in this book. And I wondered how you maybe dealt with how much to imagine and how much to let the facts kind of speak for themselves.
Oh, that's a good question. Giving myself distance from the manuscript, and then also, that's a good question. How I pared down and decided when to bring in. Well, I think so. Maybe one way I thought about it was I wanted to save a lot of the sort of imagining for my mother and the more sort of emotional aspects of the loss that I was trying to trace. And then there were just specific sections where, to me, it made so much sense to kind of allow the curious and more reporter side of me to come out and play, where it was really, I mean, I think I did so much research and reporting for this book that is not in there because my editor clawed it back and I clawed it back and was like, no one wants to read this. But I think, there's certain sections that I just thought begged for more context and analysis. And I'm thinking specifically, for example, about, I write about this Hartford cemetery where my brother was buried. And when I was just Googling facts about it, because I was like, I can't even, I wanted to just check in my memory to see if I was imagining the correct place. And when I was just simply reading about it, I saw the name of a man named Yang Wing, who was, people love, especially historians and scholars love to talk about people as the first, but as he's described, he was the first Chinese American to graduate from Yale University in the 1800s. And I was so fascinated by him because he was buried in the cemetery and he existed in Connecticut. Again, we just talked about the demographics in the 1800s, when, if you think about, the history of the United States around that time, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 made it so that there were no Chinese immigrants were not allowed to come to the US. And he was just existing in such a strange place of privilege while also not, and while also having so much loyalty to China. And I I was so taken by his story and read his memoir and read all of these scholarly articles about him and books about him, and wanted to find a way just to weave him in, because when I read about him, it gave me this feeling that I struggled to articulate. And maybe it was a loneliness, maybe it was something that sort of I realized mirrored a sense of loss that I was trying to channel in the book. And so I would always kind of bring in moments like that, context about someone like Yang Wing, when I realized that perhaps one way to describe the feeling that I had, or the question that I had, or to answer the question I had, was to sort of open up and turn outward instead of looking so deeply inward. Yeah.
It felt
Yeah. Basically that.
It felt like in the way that poetry will often put two seemingly unrelated things together and see how they spark against each other. Is that how it felt when you would put Young Wing? And there's also someone who buried her husband, but had a special like Bible where if you removed it, you could see his face. Was that what you were feeling? Like you just wanted to put these moments up against your life and see what sparked?
Exactly. Neva Dorsa, her husband was struck and killed by lightning and wanted to create this tomb that became this roadside attraction where people could slide the Bible across and watch his body in this state of decay. And I think, yeah, when these images sort of, I would just see in these images kind of a reflection back of what I was writing about. And I wanted the reader to be able to experience that also. And to, if they didn't, if it didn't resonate in one way, maybe they'll get something out of it in this other way too. Yeah.
I think it definitely resonated for me, and all of them ended up being able to say something that if you, said it baldly wouldn't have half the effect of being able to evoke the emotions and the feelings from someone with seemingly tangentially related moments.
Yeah.
They all share kind of an emotional core.
Yeah. But I mean, to your question about when I decided to lean into the imagined side of this book, I mean, I'm still thinking on that. And I think I loved the idea of being able to imagine context or imagine my mother because it felt more hopeful. I think there's something really lovely about, I don't know. I mean, for me, when I used to think about my mother, it was easier to just not, to just only allow the moments that were more painful, I think, to just sit there. And the process of imagining her, reappearing, and I'll let the reader decide if her ghosts in this book are real or imagined or whatever, but being able to write that felt almost like recovery of her character and who she was, because it gave me the freedom to put her in a different situation that wasn't exactly just about the circumstance of her death or her sickness or her, the suffering or challenges she had. And I found that really beautiful and profound. And it was really lovely, actually, as an exercise or as a challenge to myself.
And did that, the way in which you would imagine her in these new contexts, that come out of writing the memoir?
No, I mean, I think I tried to write versions of this book as a novel or, in ways that I hadn't understood were this book, where I think it probably came out of my fiction practice, which I don't talk about often, but it helped that I'd probably written some versions of her before and had always been interested in this idea of, like a magical realist figure. And so it kind of gave me the freedom to sort of run with that.
Okay, that's so great to hear that it wasn't just through the writing of the memoir that you unlocked this, more hopeful way of imagining your mom, that it was really just through writing in general, which I think you've, throughout this memoir, it's clear that writing has always been a part of your life. You also kept really great diaries. You wrote very well. You had a great voice, even as like a high schooler. I did not sound like that.
It was because that was all I did, and we couldn't talk about loss, so I wrote about it on in my diaries or online journals, which were actually very helpful in the crafting of this book because, they're not public anymore, but I had them for myself, or I'd email myself, basically diary entries. That reminds me, just writing for me has always been something that's been tremendously rewarding and hard. And I've always been interested in the ways that I can tell a story through words or whatever medium. I mean, radio too. But yeah, certainly writing this book was not cathartic. And I think often of what the writer T. Kira Madden, who wrote the memoir Long Live the Tribe of Fatherless Girls, she wrote this beautiful essay in, I think, Lit Hub called Against Catharsis, where she essentially, one of the questions she received a lot at her book tour events for Long Live the Tribe was writing this memoir cathartic for you? And she sort of walks the reader through how it wasn't cathartic. I mean, it was because she was writing about her life, but also she was working at crafting a narrative and something that still felt so outside of herself. And I think I really understood that when I was working on this, because I needed a way to give myself the freedom to shape this into a story that hopefully people would care about and read. And also protect myself too as a writer, but also give myself the chance to just really play.
Yeah, I think that is such a smart way of thinking about it, where we often will think of writing as catharsis, but catharsis is messy and it's chaotic and it isn't a neat narrative. A story is like maybe catharsis cleaned up for, wiping the smeared makeup off and making it presentable with a public face. I think that's definitely closer to my understanding of writing a story, or even just the way that a story necessarily simplifies really complex experiences. That in some ways, the better the story, maybe the more things that are being reduced, which maybe makes me think about the news stories that get passed around and that go viral. They often are the ones that are most reduced to be kind of the best stories that are possible.
The best clickbait, yeah.
So I do want to open up to audience questions soon. So I'll give people a chance to start typing away at questions, and I'll ask maybe one or two more while this tab starts filling up. So you mentioned, you working with an editor, and I know that as a journalist, you've worked with many editors on making a work stronger, but I was interested in how working with an editor for this memoir was different or similar as an experience.
It was interesting because it felt very collaborative, and my editor, Maddie Caldwell from Grand Central Publishing, one of the most helpful things that she did early on was identify that this book was really about parallels between my mother and, for example, the ways we worried about our bodies and the ways in which her mother passed when she was young and the ways she leaned on her siblings to be sort of nurturing parental figures for her. And then my father too, in terms of this debt that our family felt we had to, for me and my sisters, it was reburying my brother and his ashes with my mother, which was one of her last requests. For my father, it was finding his father's remains in Havana, Cuba. And so in a way, once my editor sort of helped me see that this was, these were the similarities, it kind of helped the structure. So everything felt as though it was pushing toward these two endpoints of resolution toward finding the bones, burying the ashes. But yeah, I think I was really fortunate to have an editor who also understood the humor in this book and did not discourage me from it, because I think a lot of editors might have or not understood it or things of that nature. But I also felt really fortunate too, because I was never forced to explain Chinese culture in a way that I didn't want to. And that was wonderful, because I in my reporting, I frequently write about Asian Americans. That was a beat that I requested at NPR and really fought for. But writing this book felt so much like a gift, because I could define the bounds of, I'm not going to translate any of the Cantonese. It's not going to look any different than the English. And there's just going to be certain holidays that I'm not going to define. And people can figure it out. They can be lost, they can be mad, or they can just totally get it. It's okay. But there were just other so many little choices that built up like that made it really helpful. But yeah, editing on a big scale, I mean, it seems like a challenge, and so kudos to my editor for getting me to submit my book at the end finally. I think she's actually on this. Let me check. She is. Hi, Maddie. So kudos to you, Maddie.
I mean, it seems like, you know, in big and little ways, trust was built between you two so that you could push, you know, yourself into places and fight for things that you felt belonged in the book and hear each other when maybe Maddie said not so much of Young Wing's story. So it seems,
I
like a
think
great
she might
way.
have said more. Yeah.
Oh, more.
No, I mean, one of my good friends told me at the start of this process that writing a book is like doing a series of trust falls. And that was really helpful throughout the whole process of just, I mean, while it was hard, but acknowledging that the book could be done and that I would eventually like it. And that, you know, I mean, I've been edited so much throughout my career and by a lot of different people, as you were saying, that everything is just information. And I think it was actually you who made this comment once in a conversation where you said, you know, people might be reacting to different things in this draft or a draft, but really they're, well, maybe you can articulate it better than my memory, but you were basically getting at the idea of you didn't want to be prescriptive about how to fix a problem, and that there are many different ways to fix a problem in writing, and that sometimes a solution could just address multiple things. Yeah. Do you remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was this idea that like I was going to end up being prescriptive. I was going to be like, you need to do this with your structure, or you need to have this person be more of a character. But all those, you know, bits of feedback were not actually the problem. They were symptoms to a problem.
Yes,
and so,
they were symptoms to a problem.
Exactly. So yeah, like you didn't actually have to change the structure. I was just reacting to maybe right now there not being as much of a structure. And it was up to you to figure out what you wanted to do to address that kind of root issue, but certainly not by following my advice.
I did not follow that. Yeah. I mean, I think that advice like that is just so helpful in general for writing.
I think like if you have other bits of advice, I'm always collecting advice from people that actually works. Do you have anything else that comes to mind that was helpful in your writing process?
I mean, definitely the trust fall thing, but I mean, one thing that really helped me was keeping a specific journal to write about the book and how I felt about it. And that was really special to have. I mean, because it's separate from my you know, everyday journal or whatever. And it was really nice to be able to just go back and refer to the questions that I was having about the book. And so every week or every single day I was writing, and I don't write every single day, I would sort of sit down and say, like, what are the problems that I'm having with this book? And I would kind of write a letter to myself about what I was trying to answer or what I was trying to work through. And if I, you know, would read back multiple entries and see that it was the same thing, then I knew it was something that was a problem or that I had to figure out a better way to address.
I love that. I have actually never heard that before, and it would be, I'm going to start using it because I feel like I actually end up forgetting problems and questions that I had and then having them like 3 months later and feeling, oh my gosh, like I just ended up at the exact same place.
It was actually Alex Chi. I'd read an interview that he did about craft who suggested the journal thing. And then for me, I realized I would just get too distracted writing about whatever was happening in the news and how it was affecting my writing. And so I needed something to kind of ground that. So I would specifically kind of give myself these prompts or like make a checklist of everything that I needed to write or figure out or research. Yeah.
And it also feels like then you have this artifact of this that you've done. I almost want you to publish a sequel kind of behind the scenes to this memoir of like the making of, because I feel like you must have just done so much work that doesn't even show on the page, least of all the investigative reporting that you did. I mean, it could really be a masterclass, Kat.
I don't know. I mean, this draft, the one of the final ones that I handed into my editor was like 110,000 words, and the book itself now is maybe 75. And one version of this book had footnotes. I mean, so yeah, there's just a lot of extra stuff that never made it. But I think as the process of writing it was really defining in a way, because it gave me so many different spaces to play in with so many different voices. And I found that really, really important, informative.
I think that makes a lot of sense, that, you know, you're also just playing out all the ways that your book can be before you settle on, you know, the right fit for it. Just the way that, you know, when we're becoming teenagers, we're trying on different selves. I feel like all books go through like an adolescent phase, which is maybe the most difficult part of writing them.
Yeah, you're like, I'm sick of you. But yeah, I'm really proud of how this book has grown up and come out into the world. So yeah.
You should be. It's a beautiful book, and I think we're pretty much at time. And I guess I'll just throw one last question to you, which is,
Sure.
you know, this book is so much about inheritance, what you inherit, and of course, there's a future generation that will inherit all that came from your generation, including this memoir. And so I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts about what future generations, future Chow girls will take from inheriting this memoir?
Oh man, I mean, it's actually really a really interesting question. And one of the things that comes to mind is one of my cousins actually read this book a few weeks ago. I gave her a copy before it came out. She's 16, and she is the granddaughter of my Yima. So my mom's sister is her grandmother. And we text, but we're not like, I'm not a part of her everyday life. But now I kind of am, because she has this excuse to talk to me about our family and kind of engage with this. And she, didn't know my mother, but she knows the different players, and she kind of knows me. And she really loves writing, and I want to encourage that in her. And I hope that, and she seemed to enjoy the book, which was actually really cool. I think her review, she gave it, the chef's kiss emoji and the like angry, like snort face, which I didn't understand and had to ask her what that meant. But it's been interesting because just the things that she engages with and picks up on, they're just not what I would have imagined. And so it's sort of, I don't know, maybe she'll write a version of this family story one day, and I would be really excited about that. And I love the idea that you can have conversations with family members across generations through writing. I think that's so tremendous, and I think that's a lot of why I do the work that I do, and why writing this book was so just personally important.
Absolutely. I feel all of that just hits really hard and really sharply right in the heart for me. And I feel like this is absolutely a tremendous accomplishment and a gift that you've given, not just to your family, but to the future, and to all of us. So I guess that's pretty much how we'll end it, I think. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I don't know if Kaylee's coming back on to say bye, but yeah, there she is.
Hello.
Thank you both so much for this beautiful conversation. It was such a delight to spend our evening together. Thank you to everyone who attended. And if you've registered for the event, you will get a link in a few days of the event recorded as well. So that's awesome. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Awesome. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.